Hey everybody, with the new year upon us, if you're like me, you are trying to read more books in 2019, so I thought it'd be kind of cool and beneficial if I went through all of the books that I read in 2018 and kind of like a rapid fire review and reaction for each of them, and hopefully there's a book or two in there that you can pick out, some of my favorites or some that sound good to you that you can add to your 2019 reading list, and let me know what you think of them. So let's just get right into it. Started off this year with a little known indie trilogy. You ever heard of it? This one was actually my favorite movie, and it turned out to be my favorite book. I personally liked Return of the King the least out of the three, with the movie and also the book, but come on, let's be honest, the whole reading experience for me from start to finish was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had with a book or series of books, so couldn't complain. This one was pretty fucked up. It was a classic and I liked it. This was a eerie kind of ghost mystery story that had a blues musical element to it, so what's not to like about it? I really liked it. I called this one an adult fairy tale, kind of a feel-good story, and it made me feel good, so there you go. This is an over-the-top audiobook only story starring John Hamm and a few other celebrities that you could probably pick out. Give it a sample listen first if you can find a clip of it, because it's short but it kind of got stale for me, and it's pretty dark and not appropriate. Way too long and contradicts itself pretty much every other chapter. I don't know how this got so much praise and ended up on a bunch of business favorite lists, but it needed an editor and it needed about 150 less pages because it was fucking long. This is basically another version of the life-changing whatever of tidying up. I liked it. It was good enough, had some good lessons in it. Other people are living longer than us in the world, and this book sets out to understand why. A lot of good lessons in it, and made me want to get my shit together. This was one of the best fiction books that I read this year. This is a crazy story about the Gawker, Peter Thiel, Hulk Hogan sex tape saga that we went through a few years back. An amazing story. Ryan Holiday, the author, tells it really well, and I highly recommend his other books. Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, a few of the others. The author's a really great storyteller, and this book was no different. I mostly like Gary Vee, but this book kind of overpromises and underdelivers on its concept, and it just did not hit it for me, so Really inspiring guy, really cool life story, roller coaster ride. I would highly recommend getting the audiobook too if you are a runner or an athlete. Very motivational. This is one of the best novels I have read in the last 5 years. I cannot recommend it enough. This one was a long time coming. I'm ashamed to say this was my first Hemingway. It was a beautiful little book and I loved it. I appreciate the originality of Bourne. It's a great little sci-fi story and I really enjoyed it. I wanted to like this one, but I couldn't. This author was billed as the Jon Stewart of the Middle East, so it was very educational because I don't know about the Middle East, but it wasn't very funny. It didn't have that bite that I thought it would have, so it was kind of meh. This was a good little short story collection. Funny little stories, made me laugh. That's about it. This one was published in 2013, but is becoming more and more relevant by the day or week every time Google or Facebook or a similar company fucks up, so even better in 2018. I love Nick Offerman, but unfortunately this book was just okay. I actually like his other book, Gumption, more that I read a year or two ago, so I definitely recommend that one. This was unexpectedly awesome. A great sports story about one of the greatest coaches ever, told by one of his players, who also happens to be one of the greatest basketball players ever. Really good. It was good, but at this point you might as well just read the Cliff Notes or read a blog post or one of the thousands of books that have knocked it off in the last 50 years. You kind of get the gist of it when you read the bullet points. This was my first Oscar Wilde experience, and it is now one of my favorite books of all time. This was a novel about your typical family tragedy and how the family dynamics play out after that, but it still felt fresh, and the author made me absolutely hate the main character, and she did a very good job of it, so I really like this one. You'll come out of this one thinking, what the fuck did I just read? In a very good way. It's only about 100 pages or so, so it's very quick. I love the author, but I wish he would have committed one way or the other. Basically, he's part memoir, part manifesto of what we should be doing in politics, in his opinion. I wish he would have just kind of committed one way or the other. So it was just okay, but kind of just scratched the surface for what I was expecting for this one. This was a fantastic ghost story, and I was absolutely hooked from start to finish. I loved it. This is another one around 100 or so pages, so if you're looking to hit a certain quota next year, I would add this book because it's only like 120, 130 pages. It sticks with you after you read it though. Another kind of creepy little ghost story. This one was over the top, but in a unbelievable way and not in a good way. I don't recommend it. This is now one of my favorite memoirs of all time and one of my favorite sports books of all time. I cannot recommend it enough. I'm a little bit late to the party, so I think everybody understands that by now, but an amazing story. Kirk Kerkorian was a revolutionary here in Las Vegas and in a few different industries, but you've probably never heard of him, just like I didn't hear of him before I read this book, but he wanted it that way. An amazing biography from a very interesting character. Speaking of interesting characters, Chris Jericho is a wrestler and literally a rock star, and a rock star in every sense of the word. He just lives a crazy life and almost like the most interesting man in the world. So this is one of his many biographies and a bunch of crazy stories. Very good. This is the same author as Sourdough, Robin Sloan, a few books ago. I like this one a lot better than Sourdough. Some magical realism elements to it and good story, but it was what it meant to be, if that makes any sense. But I like this one a lot better than Sourdough. I don't know why I read this one. It was a clusterfuck. It was depressing. I'm sure it was probably meant to be that way, but just don't read it. Just go on Twitter or something and be miserable for a few hours. This is another one by Dave Eggers about a Yemenis American who goes to pursue a dream about coffee. It sounds simple enough, but it turns into an incredible story and is very, very good. Not what I was expecting in a very good way. It's very entertaining. Author Chuck Klosterman kind of flips some conventional wisdom on its head, makes you think about things in a different way that you had not thought about before. Very digestible, and I thought about it for weeks after reading it, so highly recommend it. I know I'm gonna get hate for this one, but I just thought this was kind of boring. I'm sorry. This is the first in the sci-fi trilogy. You've probably heard about the movie or seen it with Natalie Portman. I've not seen the movie yet. I really enjoyed the book. I'm looking forward to reading the last two novels, even though I heard they are not a very good conclusion. If you know, you know. I love David Sedaris, another amazing collection of hilarious stories. The first one I got on audiobook was this one actually, so I understand why everybody tells people to listen to the audiobook. Listening to him tell the stories adds an element of it that is just awesome. Highly recommend it. I need to stop forcing myself to read books that don't interest me just because they win a bunch of awards and people are talking about them, because this was a slog to get through. I thought it was a little bit repetitive and I just was not interested. I'm sorry. What can I say? This was good enough for what it was. Some great tidbits about health and fitness and all that, told basically in the story of a one singular day from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. So I like the format of it and it was good for what it was. I am ashamed to admit that this was the first Stephen King book that I've ever read. I know. And I will be reading many more because this was one of my favorite books of the year and it was awesome. Obviously, if you have seen the movie, kind of a letdown after reading the book. This one is a little bit weird after the events of the past year with Anthony Bourdain, but I finally got around to reading his book and it is every bit as good as everybody says it is. He lived an incredible life, clearly, and this is just one part of it put on a bunch of pages and highly entertaining, hilarious. Can't recommend this one enough. This one was just a sci-fi classic that I finally got around to for a book club based on, Blade Runner was based on this book. I loved it. This was the story of Snapchat, and I don't know what I was expecting because I chose this book, but it was a little weird reading this book when Snapchat is still kind of hanging on there and there's no actual conclusion to their business or their story or their founder. So I don't know, it was just weird to read it while it's still going on. It kind of just tapered off at the end. So this is becoming a modern classic among business books and talking about startups, and I'm not a big fan of Peter Thiel the person, but I like this book a lot and I thought it brought a lot of value. So if you're in that space, I would highly recommend it. This is yet another scary one. I feel like I've read a lot of scary books this year. That was not intentional, but it worked out that way. Home invasion story, kind of, but a fresh take on the home invasion story. Very scary, claustrophobic, and I really enjoyed it a lot. I love Tiffany Haddish, the actual comedian, so that's obviously why I picked up this book, and it wasn't the greatest. Sorry, I don't know. Listen to this one on audiobook, or at least I would recommend it because that's how I consume this one. Comedian talks about race, culture, fitting in places that you're not necessarily meant to fit in. Really, really good and funny, good stories. This is one of the best business books that I've ever read, and I'm telling everybody who is in my kind of field of work to pick up this book. Very good, lots of value. I have tons of notes all over the book. I highly recommend it. This is what I wanted from a few books back, from Yes, We Still Can by Dan Pfeiffer. This was a total memoir of one of Obama's closest aides and staff members throughout his administration. Really great stories, really great insight from somebody who's very close to Barack Obama throughout his presidency. This one's hilarious if you're in the hospitality or hotel industry, especially. If you're not, then prepare to get educated and be weirded and creeped out. Kind of like Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential, but for hotels. Very funny. This one, of course, everybody knows by now. She's broken every single sales record, I think, ever for books, and she gets into it, does not hold back, and she's a successful woman in her own right, so she makes that clear, and how it was not an easy process to get on board for the presidency of her husband and making that happen. So very honest and raw, more than I was expecting to, so I really, really like this book. This is probably my favorite novel that was written in 2018. The author, it's his first novel. He wrote it in jail, and this is essentially his story, but a little bit fictionized. Joins the army, talks about relationships with his girlfriend slash wife, and there's a bank robbery in there, which is kind of awesome. So yeah, I really liked it. A little bit polarizing, but I liked it. This one was motivational as fuck. It was a part book, part podcast, because I downloaded the audiobook. I would recommend doing that. I'm sure I think the book has some pictures and things like that in there, but this was the first experience that I had with an audiobook that had interviews interspersed within the book. As the reader was reading the book aloud, he had David Goggins in the room with him and asked him questions as the book went on. So really cool interactive experience with the audiobook. I keep going back to the word digestible with this book. It's as accessible as a historical nonfiction book can be. It reads like a novel, a very interesting story, but kudos to the author who made me care about it. Awesome essay collection. I got this one for Christmas and read it in like a day, especially if you're like 25 to 35 years old and a music fan, kind of the Fall Out Boy era, which I was. And some notes on race and culture and things like that as well. So really good essay collection that I flew by. And last but certainly not least, George Saunders. What can I say about him that has not already been said? Hilarious as always. I was late to this one. This is actually the third collection that I read, but I think it's his most popular short story collection. And as always, he was amazing and hilarious, and he's awesome. So there you have it. I think the total was 59 at the end of the day for the amount of books that I read in 2018 or listened to on audiobooks. So I'm looking to surpass that goal in 2019. Hopefully you guys are setting some sort of reading goal if you care to watch through to the end of this video. So I would love to hear if you're adding a couple of these books to your 2019 reading list. If you've read a few of these and agree with me or totally disagree with me, let me know. I would love to talk about some of the books that I listed here, but thanks for watching and happy reading in 2019, and I will see you soon.